She's a primary contributor in the student voice field, having published over 30 papers and 2 books on the topics of student voice and civic engagement. She's going to tell us a little bit about the history of this conference and how we got here today.
Great, thank you, Jaden. The meetings around student voice started about 15 years ago. Next slide, please. It started in Cambridge University in England. Some of the best and early work around student voice was conducted out of a big research project that was run by Jean Ruddock, who unfortunately passed away from cancer. Her partner created an endowment for us to have 5 meetings in England. Mainly that was a researcher-focused set of groups. And it really was the start of the idea of student voice as an idea in research and in thinking about ways to kind of label that as what this work is, even though working with young people has been going on since schools began. Next slide. After 5 years there, and this is a little bit more about what was happening there. It was to honor Jean Ruddock. Alison Cook-Sather was in charge of running those meetings and to make connections internationally. Next slide. After 5 years there, Helen Beatty and Up for Learning decided to take the reins and host 3 meetings on the state side in the United States in Vermont. And there was a shift from more of a research focus to a wide range of folks who are a part of this community. Students, a lot more practitioner focused, and education leaders, as well as some researchers. Next slide, please. And then last year, we hosted a meeting in Philadelphia. You can see over there some of the leaders of today's meeting. Emmy and Jaden were presenters. And at that meeting, Kay came, Augustine, and I think what I love about this group of student voice folks is that it feels like finding your people, and that a lot of times when we present this work in traditional education settings, we have to spend many minutes arguing for why this work matters. And I like to state when I'm with my student voice colleagues that I can start on slide 4 instead of slide 1 and really get into the depth of what this work can look like and why. So I'm hoping that today is a continuation of that work, and I'll have one more slide. We also had a meeting in Australia in December. So I think I'm actually now the only person who's been to all of these meetings, but I'm hopeful that many of you will become regular attendees as well. I've got news that there's going to be a virtual meeting from Australia in December. So there's already plans for more ways to connect, and in this COVID world, in some ways we can connect more because we don't have to figure out the traveling. So the Australia meeting did bring more of the researchers in. Today is much more of a practitioner focused meeting. And I just want to make sure that folks know that there is a Facebook group that I can put in the chat, the link that has over 1,000 practitioners and researchers interested in student voice work. And we also have a journal, International Journal of Student Voice. I can put that in the chat too, of ways that practitioners and researchers can share written and video work so that we're growing a field and we're sharing knowledge of how to do this better. And that is all. I think I did it in 2 minutes, Jaden.
Yes, thank you so much, Jana, for that brief history. And now we're going to kind of get into it for our agenda for today. So we have a couple of great presentations that we're all going to enjoy as a large group. Then we're going to be breaking out into smaller breakouts on different Zooms. Do keep in mind that we will be recording all of them. So if you're not able to attend multiple, you can definitely watch one after today's session. And then we'll be joining back together as a large group to kind of summarize and debrief, and then also talk about next steps for harnessing student voice. Jaden, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you. Just to go over some norms for adult spaces, for adults and student voice spaces especially. So it's really important that we don't default to this teacher and student dynamic that's based on age. We need help. It would help if youth and adults think of themselves primarily as learners and partners in the space. For the purpose of the summit, it will help participants if they can value both lived and expert knowledge. Typically, young people might have more lived experience to offer, and adults might have more expertise. And in order to mitigate like possible power imbalance, we're asking that adults are intentional about ceding space to young people and allowing them to speak first. This isn't like putting youth on a pedestal and assuming you have nothing to contribute, but it means being conscious about encouraging younger people to participate first. And then my favorite one is thinking about the language that we're using. So avoid using kids when referring to people who are teens or adults, because it is patronizing. And then students also, please don't refer to adults as old people. Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of these are going to be similar to the norms that Jaden just mentioned, but just norms for being in a virtual Zoom space. So a big one in demonstrating respect is to limit distractions and avoid multitasking especially when you're in your breakout rooms in smaller groups. To minimize background noise, please stay on mute unless you are speaking. So especially when we're in these large group sessions, when we'll just have a couple people presenting to the whole group, make sure you're staying on mute. We would love for you all to participate, but again, on the topic of staying mute in the large sessions, feel free to use the chat that's open to everybody. In order to keep conversations going, make sure you say yes and. So instead of just agreeing, make sure you're trying to add something more to the conversation. And then like Jaden was saying about ceding space to others, just try to take 1/10 of the space of the Zoom call that you're in. So if there are 10 people, try to take 1/10 of the space so that everyone has a chance to speak. Oh, and then also oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Some reminders for like housekeeping and everything. So use the participant resource folder. I think Kay and other folks have been pasting it in the chat. Chat is for comments and questions. Some speakers get distracted by it, some don't. I'm pretty much going to leave it up to them whether or not they want people to use the chat or not. If you have problems with technology, please call that number. Write it down now if you can. We'll also paste it in the chat. Everyone is muted until breakouts, and then please use the hashtags. Please tweet. We're encouraging people to use technology. And with that, I think we can go next slide. Little prayer. Is this, Emmy, is this a part of your activity?
Yeah. So I just
Awesome.
wanted to start by grounding us today with this poem. Let ruin end here, let him find honey where there was once a slaughter. Let him enter the lion's cage and find a field of lilacs. Let this be healing, and if not, let it be. Going off of what Zoe was saying about the moment we're in and this crucial time of doubling down on our efforts for education justice, I think it's really important that we know it's not going to be an automatic healing. We're not going to have automatic reform. And that this is a process. And so I just thought this poem was a helpful way of thinking about that. And then if we can go to the next slide, the other thing that we wanted to do just to open today and that you can continue to do throughout our time together is to take notes on this fun retro board. I just sent the link in the chat. We organized it in 3 columns. You can feel free to start right now with just how you're coming in and then continue throughout your sessions if you are finding it a helpful tool. So the first column is I'm asking. These are questions that you might be wrestling with, things that come up for you. I'm learning might be stories, strategies, things that you're like, oh, that's so interesting. Hadn't thought about that before. And I'm committing is really for actions. You can also second or retweet what somebody is saying by voting, and everyone has 15 votes. So if we could just start and take a minute now for everyone to write one thing in whatever column you feel is right as we begin, that would be great.
Okay, so while everybody is writing down on the fun retro, we're going to be transitioning into our first large group presentation with Megan Simmons of Student Voice. So Megan, just let me know when you're ready to screen share and we'll transfer it over to you.
I can screen share now. Thanks, Zoe. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much to everyone who has joined us from all over the world. This is so exciting, and it's really, really great to be with all of you today. I'm so excited to be presenting today with my teammate, Ebony Ivory. Before we get going into talking about what Student Voice is and who we are as an organization, we just wanted to introduce ourselves a little bit. I'm Student Voice's Director of Operations. I've been involved in the Student Voice space for almost 5 years at this point. I'm a rising senior at Barnard College of Columbia University studying education and sociology. And prior to taking over as the Director of Operations, I ran Student Voice's programming and strategy and oversaw our 2019 national tour. So for the next couple of minutes, Ebony and I are going to be giving an overview of Student Voice, both us as an organization and Student Voice as a concept. We know we have over 100 people here from all over the world, so we wanted to make sure that we had a couple minutes just to talk about Student Voice as a concept and make sure everybody is on the same page, considering that we're all coming in here with different experiences, different levels of knowledge, and different roles in the space.
Awesome. And before we get into that presentation, I will introduce myself. Hey, y'all. My name is Ebony Ivory. I am Student Voice Director of Human Resources. A lot of my work surrounding the education space is focused on accessibility advocacy. More specifically, I work with students who have intellectual disabilities, and I work with engaging them in the education space. I attend the University of Alabama, where I major in human resources, and I attend the Honors College. All right, so some of you may know who we are, but for those of you who don't, the question is, who exactly is Student Voice? So we were founded in 2012 with the hashtag #StuVoice. Student Voice is all about equipping students to take action on issues that impact their education. We pride ourselves on being a by student, for student 501c3 nonprofit organization that works in all 50 states to equip students as storytellers, organizers, and institutional partners who advocate for student-driven solutions to education and equity. Through direct civic action, Student Voice helps students hold their schools and surrounding community accountable to the Student Bill of Rights and prepares them to become lifelong agents of social and political change.
So we like to differentiate between Student Voice, the organization, and Student Voice, the concept. We talk about Student Voice, the organization as big S, big V, and Student Voice, the concept as little s, little v. So that's just a way as we go through this slide deck to tell the difference. But we think of Student Voice, as far as the definition goes, as recognizing and acting upon the fact that students are the primary stakeholders in our education and should be partners in shaping it. One of the things that we think is important to talk about is the fact that school is really the first institution that many young people interact with. And so not having a voice or the ability to shape decision-making and policy in school consciously and subconsciously tells students that they do not have a voice in shaping the institutions that will shape them for their entire lives. So we believe that when you give students autonomy and voice in the school building, you set them up and give them the foundation for them to have a lifetime of civic action and civic engagement.
Okay, now we really want to get into and introduce y'all to the Meaningful Student Voice Ladder. This ladder has been developed over the years of study and practice of student voice by a wide range of coalition of researchers, petitioners, and students. We use this specific ladder of student voice to discuss the different levels of student voice engagement and trace progression from the most surface level of student voice expression up to the most meaningful and collaborative levels of activism and leadership. So level 1 expression is mainly tokenship, whereas by the time you reach level 5, you would have instituted practices and created an equitable partnership between students and adults. While the idea of the ladder makes us think that these steps are linear, the process of reaching the highest level of meaningful student voice is more nuanced, and an individual, people, and space can be at the different steps at the same time. We think of the ladder in schools and also in organizations and companies, basically anywhere where students are being present and or being advocated for. The ladder is a helpful tool to measure the student voice in that specific space.
So we're just going to quickly move through each level, and I know a lot of the people who actually developed this ladder are on this call, so I wanted to say thank you to them for all of their work, because this is such a valuable framework that we use to think through student voice in our lives and in our schools as well. So our first level on the ladder is expression, and expression is first because expression student voice activities tend to show surface level student voice. These activities are typically the easiest and most accessible ways to become involved in organizing and in the student voice world, and the easiest for students and adults to handle. So examples of these include volunteering and protesting, and becoming involved in the community in those ways. So these activities, while potentially a really powerful on-ramp into the world of student organizing and a great first step, they don't involve a two-way exchange of ideas and typically do not push the status quo all that much. So expression level student voice activities can be very powerful when followed up with higher levels of student voice engagement, but expression levels activities alone tend to be less effective at promoting systemic change than the others that we'll get to as we move through the ladder.
Okay, the next level of the ladder is consultation. Now, this is all surrounding the opportunity for students to provide solicited feedback. Sometimes this is through a survey or a focus group or even a simple conversation. In practice, this can look like a student government meeting or student surveys. These conversations and opportunities to feedback most often exist as a response to someone else's agenda. Sometimes they can unleash some candid voice and perspective, and if taken seriously by those doing the solicitation, can also push on the status quo. But this level of the ladder, by nature, is reactionary and often tokenizing.
So our middle level of the ladder is presence and participation. This level has to do with things like attending meetings where real decisions are being made, or being included when issues are framed or planned. So example of these meetings are school board meetings, curriculum development meetings, spaces like that. At this presence and participation level, students are allowed to be in the room where decisions are being made, rather than retroactively being involved once a decision has or essentially has been made. However, in most instances, students are being welcomed into the space as guests. It's outside of the norm for them to be included there, rather than being included as co-equal partners from the beginning, like we'll see in the next two levels.
Okay, now partnership, this often involves students having some sort of formal role in the decision making. And it often depends on at least one adult leader who understands why and how to work with youth in complementary or co-equal ways. This adult is then the expectation to the exception to the rule of the system, rather than the system being on that fundamentally brings students in by guaranteeing them a place in the room and in the decision-making process.
And finally, we come to this final slide, which depicts what's considered to be the highest level of meaningful student voice, activism and leadership. So activism and leadership is a level where students are working often, but not always, with adults as co-equal partners to identify and address issues and educate others. And even though this is the highest level, tokenization absolutely can still occur if we aren't focused on equity in our work and still demote students to an auxiliary role. So if we want to reach this level of student voice, students need to be equal co-designers. So after speeding through all of that, we'd love to take a moment for everyone to sort of do some reflection and think about where you are in your work, whether that's with your school, your organization, even in your personal life with your relationships with in intergenerational spaces, thinking about where on the ladder are you in your work. So if we can just take a moment to reflect on that, and if you feel comfortable, share that in the chat. Like Ebony mentioned before, the idea of a ladder promotes an idea that this is a linear progression, but in many ways you can simultaneously be at the highest level and the lowest level in your work in different spaces with different people. So we just wanted to give everybody a moment to sort of think through that, because that'll inform how we think through the rest of our time together today. So I'll hand it over to Ebony to finish up as everybody continues to reflect on that.
Okay, so with all that information we just gave y'all, I want to recap on everything that we just discussed and talk about those secret ingredients. First, as students as partners in the relationship means that if we want to reach the highest level of authentic, meaningful student voice, students need to be equal co-designers in the decision-making process. Second, in order to authentically hear student voices in decision-making spaces and avoid tokenization, student representation must be equitable. Emphasis on equitable. We must combine stories and statistics when talking about policy and decision-making in order to maintain the humanity of those who are being impacted by the decisions and conversations. And last, students must have a hand in shaping their own narrative. As you keep going, let's keep these 4 secret ingredients in mind for the rest of today's event and in our work moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you all, and I'll hand it back to Jaden and Zoe.
Okay, thank you so much, Student Voice. We're now going to hand it over to our team from Minneapolis Public Schools. Let me know when you all are ready to screen share.
Actually, sorry, Zoe. Minneapolis is having some trouble getting in. It looks like our cap is at 100. I'm trying to figure out how to raise the cap right now. Pritchard, if you're okay to go, would it be okay if we started with you?
For sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sorry, 1 second. No. Okay. So I'm Emmanuel Sippy. I co-direct the Pritchard Committee Student Voice Team. I use she, her pronouns. Really excited to be with you today. I'm gonna let the rest of my team introduce themselves as we continue. But we just want to start off by saying this work of students being a part of education, decision-making, of working as partners, is not radical, is not new, and is not unprecedented. We see our work as a continuation of the work of from Little Rock 9 to the Dreamers to Parkland students more recently. We know there is a precedent for student voice and for the real partnership that Megan and Ebony were just talking about. So I'll pass it off to my team to continue.
So my name is Pragya Upreti, and I'm a rising junior in Lexington, Kentucky, and I recently joined the Pritchard Committee Student Voice Team this year. And so the title of this slide is Who We Are, but it may be more accurate for us to entitle it Who We Are Now, just because we've been growing at a pretty radical pace since we started and we established ourselves as an extension of the Pritchard Committee in 2013. And so at any given time, the Pritchard Committee Student Voice Team represents roughly 100 Kentucky students, mostly high school and college age, along with several adult allies. And so crucially, our members aren't appointed, but they're self-selected. And so the overarching purpose of the student voice team is essentially just to support students as education, research, policy, and advocacy partners in the work to improve Kentucky's schools. And so since we're talking about partnership, it's important to note that the student voice team is a wholly integrated extension of the Pritchard Committee, which is certainly no small thing. The intergenerational collaboration that and the support provided by the committee ensures capacity building and youth development and community collaboration, and our exceptional adult role modeling is all a really significant part of what we do as an organization.
Hi, I'm Sophie Farmer. I am a rising senior in Bowling Green, Kentucky. So at the heart of everything that our members do is listen to other students. Because we only consist of about 100 or so young people, and because we tend to draw students who are successful in school, we know that our members cannot possibly represent the entire Kentucky student experience. This is why our core strategy is to reach out to other students from all backgrounds in the form of student-to-student interviews and roundtable discussions. This means talking to the handful of Black students about race in a mostly white rural school. This means talking with students at the Kentucky School for the Deaf using sign language interpreters. This means listening to students who must watch younger siblings and work to support their family explain why studying for the ACT is an afterthought. And this means that we are serious and intentional about amplifying and elevating the voices of students who are least heard in our system. We share those voices and stories across a wide array of platforms, from social media and blogging to op-eds, policy reports, workshops, and presentations in Kentucky and across the country. A few creative metrics to give you a better idea. Since we started this thing just not quite 8 years ago, our little crew of primarily teenagers has produced or launched 60 published commentaries in local and national news outlets, over 180 local and national presentations, 3 policy research reports, 3 statewide issue campaigns, an independent blog forum, a podcast, and a book.
So hi everyone, my name is Spandana Pavalouri and I'm a rising sophomore at DuPont Manual High School in Louisville, Kentucky. I joined Pritchard Committee Student Voice Team around a month ago. So what are we doing now in the middle of this crisis? To answer that question, in the last few months, the Student Voice Team has pivoted our school climate work by mobilizing our team around an initiative that we hope to share with Kentucky and the world over the summer and beyond. Our Coping with COVID survey student-to-student study is an ambitious group project we launched just after schools closed for the pandemic. It represents our attempt to ensure student voice and feedback about learning and equity are taken into consideration as education decision makers try to imagine the new normal in schooling. The completely student-driven study targets Kentucky middle and high school students and consists of 2 parts. Part 1 is a survey that we disseminated widely with the support of youth leadership groups and adult allies to help us reach geographically and culturally diverse populations. An astonishing 12,961 students from every one of Kentucky's 120 counties took that survey, and we're now in the process of analyzing the results with research experts. Part 2 will consist of 50 peer-to-peer interviews conducted by members of our team with students who will be identified to represent the youth diversity of the state and who might be able to surface some of the issues that have been bubbling up around equity. We're on the agenda of the Kentucky Board of Education to present what we find this August, and we will also be releasing survey trend results at the end of this month and other communication materials indefinitely. In all of this, and among other things, we hope to show what is possible when we enlist our students, our school's primary stakeholders in education research, policy, and advocacy, co-design, and above all, as solutions-oriented education partners.
Sorry about that. So as Vandana was saying, we had an amazing geographic diversity, and this was really through employing the tactics, those secret ingredients that Megan and Ebony were just talking about. So we worked with our partners both at the grassroots and grasstops levels. For example, we worked with the Kentucky YMCA and the Kentucky School Councils Association to reach students that we otherwise might not have reached. Social media was a crucial tool in getting this response rate, but it was also through connections with district leaders. And so really bridging those grassroots and grasstops was a crucial strategy for us. And now we'll introduce some of the preliminary findings.
Hi, my name, excuse me. Hi, my name is Connor Flick. I use he, him pronouns. So taking a quick note about some of our findings, we found that our quantitative data hasn't been completely cleaned yet, but due to our large sample size from Kentucky, we found that this won't change much. So some of our key takeaways from our data was, we found that a lot of habits are changing for students. So there's a lot more students that are sleeping for longer. They're going outside for longer and they're doing more leisure activities, but they're also communicating with their friends less and doing less physical activity at the same time.
We also found that connections with teachers are maybe not as robust as they should be, and are thinking through how that relates to many of the equity issues that are ever present in our schools, in terms of how this might break down with rural students, with low-income students, with students of color, and trying to we're embarking on a second piece of this, not only those student-to-student interviews, but also a companion piece that targets parents and educators to really ask them and compare with the student responses, what is this that you're seeing, how are you experiencing it, and how can this ecosystem, we don't see student voice as a one-off thing, but how can educators be supported in order to support students, lunch ladies, and seeing that collective school system really work together. So we see this data as a tool to inform action of improving schools, and we know that one major component of that is social and emotional. So emotions are high. Students feel more unmotivated, more stressed, more anxious than before school closures, but also more grateful. Cyberbullying has decreased, which we thought was an interesting finding. Another thing to note, really importantly, is that the need for mental health services has gone up, but the use has potentially gone down. And so one of the things that we're doing with partners across the state is thinking through how we can support students during this time, specifically thinking about how if there wasn't supports within a school building before the pandemic, if the counselor to student ratio was almost double the recommended as it is in my school, then it's unlikely that students are going to feel that there are supports when they leave the building. And so the supports not only have to be strengthened and reimagined, but also I think we need to think really critically about what was there in the first place. The next thing that we're noting is these remote learning challenges. Again, the motivation is a huge decrease, and the environment, the focused environment is an issue. Only 12% of students preferred a remote learning environment. And so if we are in some kind of combination, or we are still fully doing remote learning in the fall, we think that this data will be crucial in thinking through how we can improve non-traditional instruction. And as this whole thing has been about, how students can be partners in improving it. The technical challenges are another issue. We know that the digital divide is ever present, and for more on addressing the digital divide, definitely look towards the Move School Forward breakout, with which the Pritchard Committee Student Voice team is a part of. The percentage of students who are feeling mostly or always confident about their future fell from 78% to 61%. And so we know that the long-term repercussions of this and the way that it's affecting students' trajectories is really ever present, particularly for students who are least heard and most marginalized. So we're, in everything we do, centering those students and thinking through how we can best support them. You can connect with us via our blog, the Student Voice Forum, our podcast, Get Schooled, or on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And we just want to take some time for questions in the chat if anyone has any. You can also use the Q&A feature if that works for you. Somebody asked if we'd be willing to share slides and questions. For sure. We open source everything we do, and it's really important to us that anyone can learn from this and utilize these tools in a way that works for them.
Okay, thank you so much, Pritchard Committee Student Voice Team. For our Minneapolis presenters, is everybody in the Zoom? Yes, okay, awesome. Then feel free to, yes.
I'm gonna jump in 1 minute ahead. So I know we had some people drop out and go to YouTube. So I do want to preface the email that you got your Zoom link on from Eventbrite. When we go to the breakout micro sessions, I have now pasted those Zoom links in there so that people who are on the YouTube, who are watching from YouTube, will be able to access the breakout sessions. So I just want everyone to know that before we keep going and people maybe drop out a little bit more. So everyone who is not on the Zoom, who's watching through YouTube, will be able to participate in the breakouts.
Okay, awesome. And with that, Minneapolis Public Schools, feel free to screen share.
It says that the host disabled participant screen sharing. Is there any way to turn that on for just me?
Patty, you're the host. Can you make, there we go.
Is that working? Okay, thank you. So thank you so much for having us in this session today. It was really exciting to hear from the last group. My name is Maren Henderson. I use she, her pronouns. I work as an evaluation specialist for Minneapolis Public Schools and oversee some of our efforts to systematically collect youth voice, amplify youth voice, and then really make sure that youth voice drives decision-making in our system. So I want to introduce my colleagues. I know Nathaniel is here. Nathaniel, can you hop in?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you introduce yourself, Nathaniel?
Oh, I'm sorry. Hi, everyone. I'm Nathaniel. I'm currently a rising senior at Washburn High School in South Minneapolis, and I'm currently the student representative on the Minneapolis Board of Education.
And is Gabe here?
Hello, everyone. My name is Gabriel Simmons. I use he, him pronouns. I graduated from Minneapolis Public Schools 2 years ago. I served as the student representative on the Minneapolis Board of Education from 2016 to 2017. And I've continued to do work for MPS since then.
And then finally, Chief Eric Moore.
Hey everyone, this is Eric Moore, Chief of Accountability Research Equity for Minneapolis Public Schools. Going into, I believe, year 8 in my position, responsible for research, evaluation, assessment, equity, integration, social emotional learning, school improvement, accountability, all the Title I programs. So it's just a pleasure to be here. So I'm so excited to have a chance to speak with you. So I guess I'm launching. There's a lot. I mean, obviously, there's a lot going on across the nation and in the district. We just finished a major boundary change this year, and really trying to take a look across the district at integration issues. Minneapolis, the city of Minneapolis Public Schools is one of the most highly segregated school districts in the country based on race. And there's a huge correlation between race and income. For example, 90% of our African-American students in our district qualify for free and reduced lunch. So we have major challenges on integration. We went through a recent boundary change that was very nuanced in terms of conversations about race, class, and geography. Then as we move to the spring, and we've all experienced the challenges with COVID-19, and we've all been impacted by that. And you know, this revelation of the digital divide, we've already known the digital divide has existed, but the very real consequences of our students in particular. 70% of our African-American students in the district, we did not have a device. So this process of trying to support our students' learning and engagement, and at the same time recognizing that they don't even have the tools. Many of our students don't have the tools to even fully engage. And it took us about a month to get the tools in the hands of the students to be ready for students to learn. I don't think that's any different than other urban districts across the country and perhaps in other countries. But we've dealt with those issues of equity. And then, of course, the tragedy of Mr. George Floyd and his murder by police officers, and the unrest that many of you have seen in our city. And it's been a painful process for everyone here and obviously across the nation. And that isn't something that's new. I mean, we've seen image after image of African American folks and other folks of color, marginalized groups at the hands of police across the country. And so we're working through that. In fact, the Minneapolis City Council has voted to defund the police department in our city. We recently moved forward, and we're moving away from school resource officers in our schools. So we'll no longer have school resource officers in our schools. And so the backdrop to all of that is just really the importance of youth voice. And in fact, as we're reflecting upon all of these instances, we think about the importance of having the structures in place to allow our students to fully participate in the decision making. And this recognition that we can't do our best work unless we have students at the table in a way that doesn't tokenize the students that when they're participating. And we have to be aware of issues of power and when we have students at the table. So we'll talk a bit about that in this presentation. Let me just begin with a couple of quotes. One is Sandra Harding, who is a feminist methodologist and really the driver behind the work we're doing around youth participatory evaluation in Minneapolis Public Schools. And we call it YPE. We have YPE in every middle and high school across the district. And Martin can share a bit more about that, but we've been doing that work for 5 years. But women or men cannot understand or explain the world we live in, or the real choices we have, as long as the scientists describe and explain the world primarily from the perspectives of the lives of the dominant groups. That is that as school systems, we have been very adult-centric. And we're really wanting to involve our students, our youth in our district, to help us better understand the decisions that we're making. And part of this work is a recognition that these significant gaps in achievement in Minneapolis Public Schools, we have one of the largest achievement gaps in the nation based upon race. and income. Is that in some regards we're not listening to our students, the folks that we should be serving. And so we're needing to develop those structures for that. And so by recognizing science as a set of local practices, it becomes possible to decenter it and shift from an adult framework to more participatory framework and what youth voice is valued, in which all knowledge systems be equitably compared. And so that's the journey we're on. If we go to the next slide, Marin, we see this journey in two phases. And I remiss to not mention there's a book, Youth Participatory Evaluation by Kim Sabal-Flores, 2007. Just one of the most influential texts for me in terms of understanding the concept of youth participatory evaluation. We look at our work in terms of two phases. Phase one has been just establishing the programs. Youth participatory evaluation in our district actually came with the result of an Office of Civil Rights agreement. We were cited by the federal government in the United States for disproportionality for suspensions for our African American students and our American Indian students. And the Office of Civil Rights asked Minneapolis Public Schools to simply just have what we traditionally identify as a few listening sessions to find out what's behind some of the disproportionality. And we decided to do something more proactive, which was we started a program called Youth Participatory Evaluation, in which we used the research and evaluation staff, Marin's an evaluator in the department, to work with our students, train students on program evaluation methodology, so that as they're collecting information, they're able to define the challenges with their own voice, and able to research in their own voice, systematically collect data, and then present to each other. And I think a lot of this work is founded on some of the work of Paulo Freire about this development of a critical consciousness. That is that as your students are developing this research lens, that they're able to ask critical questions and present their findings to those in power. And so again, what we're trying to do with our youth participatory evaluation is recenter power by elevating voice and having structures to support that. So we've done this for 5 years, and we're not there yet. We're entering phase two, I would say, and I'll speak about that with our youth evaluation work. 2 years ago, I think we started a program called Parent Participatory Evaluation and did something similar, which is working with our parents, again, with the same concept of trying to decenter power, trying to have a school district and an accountability system in which youth voice, parent voice, and community voice is at the center. And so we started Parent Participatory Evaluation 2 years ago. We have groups, parent groups, and across African American, Somali, Hmong, Latino, and American Indian. And so those groups are helping us, again, reimagine what the district can look like using parent voice at the center, systematically collecting data on that. We've also explored a youth participatory evaluation citywide government collaboration. And we have we're fortunate to have two of our student board members, Nathaniel and former board member Gabe Spinks, that are here to talk about some of their work as student board members. But we started collaborating the youth participatory evaluation and citywide government. And what I think has been really interesting about that work, and hopefully they can elaborate on that, is that our students, which I'm really proud of, are starting to define how adults should be engaging with them. So this spring, we were planning, actually the students were planning on presenting to our school board a plan for how moving forward the adults, the school board members and other cabinet members such as myself should be engaging with them, because we often ask for, I think it's very, I don't want to say, there's a push now to include student voice on decision making, I think, across different organizations and groups. But I think it's important what the students are telling us is that they get to define what that engagement looks like, and that engagement needs to be respectful of them. If we're asking students to participate, then they get to define what that looks like. And so that's something that we're engaging in now. They're defining the parameters of what that looks like, and I'm really excited about that. Phase two, I'll go through this briefly. We're looking at doing a climate framework, and essentially we're identifying values so students will be part of that value setting for the district. We have 6 subcommittees. We have a steering committee, but we have a representation of students on that climate framework committee. Our students were very clear, and Marin, about what that needs to look like in terms of engagement on committees, being aware that we need to equalize power to ensure that students can fully participate in any process, and so we're aware of that. We want to make sure that our student voices are in our school improvement plans, which means that that's the tool that we use for monitoring accountability of what works in schools or not, so student voice will be present there. I mentioned the comprehensive design implementation, so this boundary change. We're going to have students at the table to support implementation of that. Again, we're doing this major boundary change around integration, so we're going to need our students to help us as we manage that and monitor that. And then the big piece is budget. I think as we enter the budget conversation, and I'll share with you, we're not any different than other districts where you invite a group of students in for a 1-hour meeting, in our case for a $700 million budget, and then we're asking students what they think about it, right? And that's not very genuine. So we're based upon feedback from our students in terms of how they want to be engaged, we're going to take significant time, numerous meetings to build content knowledge around the budget so that they can fully participate in those conversations. So that's phase 2. I'll just leave with you that the importance of doing this work as you get into the phase 2 in terms of having our students define our values in the district, supporting the school improvement plans, helping with implementation and budget, is you have to build the structures. And we took, it's taken us about 5 years to do that. You have to build the structures so that our students can fully participate in an institution that is adult-led, and that is based upon the beliefs and values of adults. So there is going to be some significant work we do this year and moving forward in terms of required professional development for all staff around equity. Part of that training will be supporting our adults in understanding how to engage with our youth in a way that gives up power and allows full participation. So that's the work that we're engaging in now. Martin, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Could I get a time check when you need us to be done with the change in schedule?
We're actually about 10 minutes ahead of schedule.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so you should be good.
Great, thank you. That's helpful.
That was Mara's way of telling me not to talk so much.
Yeah.
Nice.
We worked together for 5 years. So what we want to do now is really shift and hear from the 2 youth who are leading this work in Minneapolis, but I will be playing sort of a facilitator role and asking them some questions. So as Eric mentioned, we have 2 main sort of programs that we see really amplifying youth voice. One is the Citywide Student Leadership Board, which is more of a traditional representative model. And then the other is our YPE program, which again is more of a grassroots youth at their school shaping the conversation. And then both of those groups are in service of the student board representative, who's a young person sitting on our school board. And those are the folks we've invited to join us today. So I first want to ask Gabe to reflect on your experience as a student board rep a few years ago, and specifically sort of what worked well for you and what was missing as you were trying to bring youth voice forward to our school board.
I was a student board rep back in 2016, 2017. It was rough. There wasn't a very clear outline of what I should necessarily be doing in bringing youth voice to the board, and there wasn't very well thought out structures in which I could receive that youth voice without, just going to my school and asking a bunch of students at lunch, in my lunchroom. There was Citywide. That was an attempt to bring youth voice to the district. So Citywide Student Leadership Board is essentially a group of students from all over the district, the high school specifically, that would help advise the student rep. But back in 2016, we didn't have representation from all those high schools. So it was very hard to say it was authentic student voice. But as things went on, I began to get an idea of what I should be doing and how I should be representing student voice on the board and speaking up for students, not only just on a high school level, but for middle school students and elementary students. But overall, I think it was a positive experience just getting to build the structure of Citywide and building that student voice for years to come.
Thanks. Nathaniel, can you kind of describe the current state? What's changed since Gabe was in the role, and how the changes have helped you do your work a bit better?
Yeah, I think a lot has changed since 2016. I have to say Citywide is a lot more robust. We have kids from every comprehensive high school, so we get kids from just about every school. There are a lot more kids now. And I mean, the only thing I have to say, also, when you're a student rep, you have to be a part of Citywide. And I think that's really helpful as well, because I think the number one thing that you're worried about is that you paint like a false picture for adults, where you only talk about your experience in one school and one classroom. And when you're a part of Citywide, not only do you get, the opinions and voices of students, in that group of students, but those students are also leaders in their community. So, if we want to go get an opinion on something or on student voice or anything like that, those students can go to their, because me and Gabe can't go everywhere and do everything. So they can go to their school, they can go get, a focus group, get 20 kids, and then bring that back to Citywide. And that can help inform your decision-making, how you go about business. And then the great thing about YPE is, number one, you get to hear from middle school students. And I think that's something that we forget about sometimes. We only want to listen to the high schoolers and the older kids, but the middle school students also have some great things to say as well. And I think the best part about YPE is that, you get to go into conversations when you're the lone student in the room. And sometimes when you're in that position, you may feel like the odd one out and you may not want to speak your mind. But when you have, the opinions of 1,200 kids, from a YPE project, think the same as you, you can go into that conversation and really get a message across and, make more meaningful statements.
Thanks. Gonna move us along. So what you're seeing on the slide now is how we've sort of oriented what we've learned from YPE, or Youth Participatory Evaluation projects, over the last 5 years. We actually did a meta-analysis of each individual school team's projects. All of the projects are available on our website, and we have those linked at the end of our presentation. But we did this meta-analysis work really in deep partnership with Gabe. So I was hoping Gabe could start and tell us more about the process of looking at YPE projects and how it was that you sort of came to this graphic understanding, with relationships at the center, student learning and school policies deeply connected to that, and that those three components are really how we would describe our student experience.
Yeah, when I first began looking at the YPE projects, I kind of separated the projects into school policies, student learning, and relationships. And the data, I looked at the anecdotes from the students, and each anecdote I was seeing a pattern. It was, my student experience is being affected by this policy, which is based off of my relationship due to my identity. That's what I was seeing across all these anecdotes from all over the middle school and high schools. And so it became clear to me that relationships, your student experience was affected by a school policy that was based off of your relationship with the student or teacher or staff member, which was dependent on your identity as a student. And so I was able to organize those and come up with this kind of idea that this model here, and the data only backed it up, that our students of color were feeling, discriminated against within the classroom, either by a teacher or a staff or by a school policy. And that was based off of their identity as a student. Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, thank you. Nate, is there anything you would want to add in terms of sort of how you react to this model? If this resonates with you, is this what you hear your peers talking about at Washburn?
Yes. I mean, I think of like the biggest thing you hear from Washburn students, or you hear from kids at Washburn, is, you know, some students don't feel comfortable in their classes. We have this huge problem with students of color. First of all, not being in advanced classes, but not having comfort in advanced classes. And YP actually at Washburn, they did their project on that last year, which was great because that's an example of, you know, students voicing a problem, then YP being able to pick it up. And then we actually went in, we held a focus group at Washburn when we did that boundary change. Most students said they talked about climate and culture and how they don't feel comfortable, especially their students of color, don't feel comfortable in certain classes with the teacher, the curriculum, and the students in that class. And now we're moving forward and, you know, rethinking and reevaluating our climate and culture. And now we get to send an invite back to those kids to be a part of that conversation of, you know, how do we move forward and create a more just climate and culture in our schools.
Yeah, I just want to add, I mean, what I'm really fired up about, based upon the work of the students, is that we do have, I mean, it's a meta-analysis of voices across the district that will drive policy. It's been systematically collected. It's heard. I mean, you know, it's when we talk about the climate committee, that's the representative of union members from across the district. I'm co-chairing that with the head of the teachers union. You know, there's parents, there's teachers, there's principals. I mean, but the findings, and Marin has been integral in leading some of these conversations, are at the center. All the committee members are hearing directly the findings of the students, which will shape the values moving forward. And so when you talk about being student-centered, it starts with the values. How do we see our students? And I love that this is a trend. I mean, this isn't something new. And what happens a lot of times, what I've seen in my career, is we always think the experiences are anecdotal. We think it's happening in one school or it's happening with one group. And when you're in a position of power, what I see a lot of times is people silence the voices by making it marginal, by saying it's anecdotal or it's happening one. So what I see is like this work is really it has such a high level of rigor that I think that people are listening and we're moving on it, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to add, so often what we're asked to do is to bring a few students into an adult created space to gather student voice. And we've really been pushing back on the system in its sort of tendency of doing that. And some of the strategic moves we've made, including sort of this memo meta-analysis that Gabe led, has allowed us to say, young people have told us what they think in so many ways, and we now need to hear them. And we need to demonstrate that we're ready to listen. So I would say the other big learning we've had is the need to support adults in hearing young people. That you all have so much to say, but that we as adults have a lot of need to change. And so we've been trying to support both adults and young people in this work. The last slide you're seeing was an image from our youth. So you may have seen some version of a ladder of youth participation in this work. I think a lot of us kind of draw on Hart's research. But Gabe or Nate, do either of you want to kind of share your vision for youth voice in Minneapolis Public Schools and more specifically why you wanted a fire truck on this slide?
You want to go first, Gabe? Fire truck was your idea.
Sure. Yeah. My vision of youth voice in Minneapolis in the next 5 years would be having all of these connected organizations of youth together. So within MPS in Minneapolis, we have lots of youth organizations such as Citywide, YPE, the Minneapolis Youth Congress, and the Young People's Youth Coalition. I've been trying to connect these organizations for a very long time, and I think It's very possible to do. And if we could connect all of these youth organizations together and have a comprehensive youth voice, it would really be authentic. And we can really go to the district or go to the city and say, we have collected all of the youth voice in Minneapolis through these organizations, and this is what we have found. And I think that's a very possible goal to achieve within the next 5 years. Also, probably within the next 5 years, it may be hard to do, it may be really problematic. However, I think giving the student rep a vote on the board would be something to do. And if we can connect all these organizations and have YPE's data, we should be able to, do a survey and forums and workshops to get students' voices heard and get their opinion on a certain aspect of what the board is voting on, so the student rep can give a genuine vote. Yeah. I picked a fire truck because Maren mentioned the ladder, and I just feel like a fire truck ladder is a little bit more appropriate. I feel like everything right now happening within youth is it's a hot topic, and we need to I guess like rush. We not necessarily rush, but I don't know. It was just a feeling I got. Like if I had to pick a ladder, it'd be a fire truck ladder.
Nathaniel, what's your vision for Youth Voice and MPS?
I just want to say I think the fire truck ladder was a great idea. I think when it comes to student voice and getting youth involved in projects, anywhere, it can be tokenizing. It can be tokenizing in MPS. It can be tokenizing, if you go to the legislature, city council, any governing body, and you're a student and you voice your opinion. That's kind of universal, and I still think we can do better. And that's not, specifically towards MPS. I think, as a community everywhere, we can do better when it comes to listening and engaging students. I think how we get to a better point, how we get to a better place, I agree with Gabe. I think we should give the student rep a vote. I would just really love it if, students could email me, we could work together. I could call up a director and I could put a resolution forward that was created by students and the board could vote on it. I think that would be awesome. I hope that we get to a point in time where we don't really have this process of hey, go find 20 students and then bring them back here so we can talk to them. It's more of a genuine process where when students voice their concerns, we actually just listen to them from the get-go and, work with them and listen to them and actually engage them and not only do that, but take action more swiftly. But yeah, that for at least the next 5 years, that's where I hope we get to. I also want students to make sure that they have these opportunities. I think when you're in middle school, when you're underclassmen, you kind of get this idea that who's going to listen to me, the higher ups don't really, they don't really care. You don't really. Some students don't even know about some of these opportunities, and I wish that we made it a little more widespread. And we have this problem with adults where we talk to the same 20 parents or the same 20 teachers or the same couple of principal. We do the same thing with our students where we talk to the same group of students over 3 years and we call that student engagement. And I hope it becomes more widespread and more accessible.
Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'd love any questions in the chat or aloud until we're told we're out of time. Trying to see if there's any questions already in the chat. There's lots of enthusiasm for the fire truck, Gabe. We see some questions around how to access our information. So we'll be sure to share that with the group. Is there anything else in the chat people would like to bring up?
If there are no questions, I think we will start moving to do breakout sessions. Thank you so much, all the folks from Minneapolis. That was amazing. And we'll be sure to share out your materials. Of course, we'll have a copy of the recording to send out to everybody, and then we can get contact information for you in case anybody has questions later. For the breakout sessions, everybody watching on YouTube, I have pasted the link to the document here. It's like on page 3 of the one I also just pasted in the chat as well, where you'll be finding the links for the Zoom sessions. We're going to have Lindsay Hallman to explain just how this is going to work and go through some of the names of everything.
Thank you, Jaden. So first of all, thank you to all the our presenters this morning. And in order to make our breakout micro sessions move smoothly, folks have already shown some great flexibility in getting on YouTube. The chat has the link in both YouTube and in Zoom. You're going to leave this one if you haven't already done so. You're going to find the link to the breakout session. I'm just going to review each of the sessions, and then we'll come back together at the end. So let me review the sessions, and then I'll go over just the way this is going to work for those that are still on Zoom. So our breakout sessions are engaging students in virtual service learning with National Youth Leadership Council, creating strong youth adult partnerships that empower student voice with Up for Learning, creating student-led youth voice events and programming with Iowa Student Learning Institute, using days of service as an on-ramp for student voice, Youth Service America, Power of the Process, how a youth participatory action model facilitates student choice and voice. This is with University of Chicago Consortium on School Research. Student voice in the early years with Dana Mitra. Student voice at the collegiate level with Jaden Deal. And Move School Forward, which is a collaborative project, how students are mobilizing for education justice with Student Voice and Pritchard Committee Student Voice team. So there's so many to choose from. As I'm seeing in the chat, people are saying that, but they will be recorded. And so wherever you go is the right place to go, and you can always catch up on the other ones later. At the end of your breakout micro session, you will be prompted to return back to our main session with the link in your chat. So we will see you back here in a half an hour, and we hope that you have a great breakout. Any other announcements before folks sign off?
Nope, I think you covered it all, Lindsay. Thank you.
Great, I'm gonna hop off to mine.